When the forest goes silent, something else starts to move. From families found lifeless in sealed cellars to giant tracks appearing in fog-wrapped valleys, every story hints at a watcher that steps where no human can. From vanished hikers and frozen ridges to spiraled stones and perfect circles in the snow, patterns repeat in places miles apart. Even RV parks, mountain trails, and deep pine corridors become stages for something patient and unseen. No matter the country or season, the same heavy thuds echo through the dark. Watch till the end. On December 4th, 2025, in the frozen forests of Arkhangelsk Oblast, a strong winter storm moved across a small rural settlement where the Kuznetsov family lived in a wooden cabin near a line of dense pines. Weather reports from that night recorded heavy snowfall, strong winds, and low visibility. Neighbors later stated that the family often used their root cellar during severe storms, since the ground shelter stayed warmer and offered better protection from falling branches and cold winds. The family had stocked it with winter food, simple tools, and wooden crates used for storage. At around 2:30 a.m., 2 nearby households reported hearing strange sounds through the blizzard. The descriptions were similar: slow, heavy thuds spaced far apart and a low exhale that carried through the storm. The pattern did not match normal wind movement or the creaking of frozen trees. No one left their homes during the night due to the dangerous weather, but several residents remained awake, noting the steady rhythm of the impacts as they moved around the Kuznetsov property before fading into the storm. When the snow eased the following morning, neighbors noticed that no smoke rose from the Kuznetsov chimney, which was unusual after a long, cold night. The yard appeared disturbed, with flattened snow forming wide, swirling shapes around the cabin. Because visibility had been low during the storm, no one had seen the property clearly until daylight. Concern grew quickly, and local authorities were contacted for a welfare check. Investigators reached the home using snow vehicles, as the access road was partly blocked by drifts. The cabin door was shut, and snow covered the windows. Near the entrance to the root cellar, the storm had pressed snow into deep folds, but the wooden door showed clear damage. The center panel had been splintered inward, with broken pieces lying on the ground. The hinges hung loose, bent outward from force applied from outside the cellar, not from within. The cellar interior was cold and silent when the team entered. The structure remained intact, with the earthen walls holding their shape and no sign of collapse. The first responders found the Kuznetsov family inside. Each person was lifeless, either seated or lying against the wall or floor. There were no marks on the walls, no overturned storage bins, and no evidence of a struggle. Clothing remained in place, and no defensive injuries were present. Lighting equipment revealed unusual details on the packed dirt floor. Large, barefoot impressions formed wide arcs across the cellar. The spacing and depth of the prints showed pressure far beyond human weight. Crates that normally sat in simple rows had been stacked into spiral shapes, and several root vegetables stood upright in the dirt, arranged in a pattern that did not match normal storage or accidental movement caused by storm vibration. Authorities documented the area but did not release any explanation regarding the cause of death. They confirmed only that the bodies showed no trauma and that the investigation would continue. The search of the exterior and the deeper forest began shortly afterward. As investigators moved from the cellar back into the open clearing, they began a full survey of the snow around the cabin. The storm had softened some details, but several features remained clear. Snow in a wide ring surrounding the structure was pressed flat in swirling, uneven shapes, as if something large had moved repeatedly through the area during the night. The pattern did not match wind scouring or drifting, and no tire marks or equipment tracks indicated human presence during the storm. The path between the cabin and the edge of the forest showed deeper depressions, spaced far apart, though not enough detail remained to form a full print cast. No human footprints continued from the property into the woods. A sweep of the tree line revealed branches bent downward at consistent intervals. Some had snapped at mid-height, the breaks clean and smooth, without splinter scatter typical of storm damage. The bending formed a narrow path that extended several meters into the forest, before disappearing into thicker growth. Snow beyond that point showed no signs of movement. The team marked the location and continued outward, but no additional features appeared beyond the first cluster of bent limbs. Inside the cabin, items remained undisturbed. Chairs stayed in place, cookware rested neatly on counters, and clothing hung as usual. There were no signs of robbery, no burn marks, and no damaged furniture. The calm interior contrasted sharply with the broken cellar entrance and the patterns in the snow outside. The stove showed no recent fire, supporting the neighbors' accounts that the house had gone cold during the night. Medical staff examined the bodies after removal from the cellar. No wounds, bruising, or defensive injuries were discovered. Toxicology tests returned normal. There were no signs of poisoning, smoke inhalation, or freezing exposure severe enough to account for the sudden deaths. The final documents listed the cause as undetermined. Wildlife experts stated that no known animal in the region behaved in a way that matched the patterns found on site. Authorities did not link the deaths to any unusual creature. The official stance remained that the case required further review. As news of the event reached nearby settlements, residents reacted with growing caution. Many avoided traveling after sunset, especially near the forest sections closest to the Kuznetsov property. Reports slowly spread among villages. Some residents spoke of hearing slow thuds traveling across the snow on calm nights. Others reported low breathing sounds echoing through the trees when the wind was still. None of these accounts was confirmed, but they increased fear across the region as winter deepened. Weeks later, the cabin remained empty. Snow sealed the cellar entrance, and the yard grew quiet under heavier storms. The disturbed patterns in the clearing faded as new snow settled across the land. Only the bent branches at the edge of the forest remained visible when the weather allowed. Investigators closed the active search, leaving the case listed without resolution. The Kuznetsov family's disappearance remained unexplained. The arranged crates, upright vegetables, wide floor impressions, and the silent forest around the cabin stood as the only evidence of what had occurred. Locals continued to avoid the area, convinced that something large and patient still watched from the deep woods, hidden within the long winter silence. On August 3, 2025, before the first hint of daylight reached the Dolomites, hot air balloon pilot Elena Rossi prepared for a quiet morning ascent over the valleys she had flown for years. At 39, she was known throughout the region for steady flying and for guiding tourists over mountain ridges during calm seasons. She launched from a small open field she often used, rising slowly as the burner warmed the air inside the balloon. The mountains below were still dark, and the first layers of fog rolled thick between the ridges, settling into every low hollow of the landscape. Elena expected some patchy mist that morning, but the density surprised her. It clung tightly to the slopes, twisting in slow, pale sheets. Her flight path drifted toward a secluded basin where tall rock walls stood on three sides. The fog there deepened with each passing meter, swallowing the lower slopes and softening all sound. Elena watched the ground appear and vanish in uneven flashes as she moved above the shifting white cover. She adjusted the burner to rise slightly, but the winds nudged the balloon sideways, guiding her into the thickest part of the valley. For several minutes, only the faint glow of the balloon's flame lit the space around her, and she saw nothing but white folds stretching in every direction. Then the fog thinned just enough to reveal the basin floor below. Through the gap, she noticed large shapes pressed into the wet soil, deep impressions spaced widely apart, each filled with pale fog that sat inside them like still pools. They formed a scattered pattern across the ground, heavier and broader than any human stride. Elena knew the basin stayed empty most seasons, with only light footpaths from hikers crossing the edges. These marks did not match any prints she had seen before, and their depth suggested a weight far beyond normal wildlife. The fog closed again, hiding the basin. When it opened once more, she saw several trees leaning outward in unnatural angles. Their bark showed long, scraped marks reaching high above where a person could touch. The cuts followed clean vertical lines, as though something tall had brushed against them while passing through. Even from above, The mark stood out sharply against the dark wood. Elena steadied the balloon, keeping silent as she continued drifting across the basin. As she descended slightly to regain control of the flight path, the fog rolled beneath her in slow waves. Another opening formed, revealing a tall, still shape standing in the center of the mist-covered ground. It rose well above the surrounding branches, its outline broad and unmoving. Elena could not see features, only the full silhouette against the pale fog. It faced upward, directed toward her balloon with a motionless posture that carried an unsettling sense of awareness. The mist swallowed the figure for several seconds. When it thinned again, the shape was gone. No shadow, no outline, no movement remained on the basin floor. Yet the treetops beneath her shifted in a slow ripple, as if something heavy moved through them without urgency. Elena tightened her grip on the ropes, heart pounding as the balloon drifted toward the far side of the valley, where the fog deepened again and the quiet air pressed heavily around her. As Elena drifted toward the far edge of the basin, the fog continued folding around the balloon in slow, uneven sheets. The air held a cold stillness that did not match the summer season, and every sound felt muted beneath the thick layers of white settling across the valley. The treetops below shifted again in a steady wave, bending one after another in a pattern that moved beneath the fog line. No clear figure appeared, yet the motion carried a weight that suggested something large had passed directly under her flight path. Elena adjusted the burner once more, sending the balloon higher, but the wind pushed her downward in a gentle slope, guiding her deeper into the quiet stretch of mist. The fog opened briefly, revealing another section of ground shaped by wide pressed arcs. The soil looked flattened in sweeping curves, as if something broad had moved through in controlled roots. Several smaller trees tilted outward, their trunks marked by more vertical scrapes reaching near their tops. A thin layer of drifting fog clung to the bark, filling the fresh grooves. The sight lasted only moments before the mist closed again, hiding everything beneath. Elena steadied her breathing, keeping the balloon angled toward a rising current she hoped would lift her away from the basin. After several minutes, the fog began thinning as she reached the upper edge of the valley. Light filtered through the clouds, dim but clearer than before. When she finally broke free into open air, the sudden brightness felt almost harsh after the thick white below. The balloon climbed above the highest ridge, and the motion beneath the treetops faded until the landscape returned to stillness. Elena kept her course steady, avoiding any further descent near the basin. The morning continued with an uneasy calm until she reached her landing zone on a small clearing she often used during early flights. Hours later, after securing the balloon, she spoke quietly with residents from a nearby village. They listened as she described the deep impressions in the soil, the leaning trees, and the shifting ripple in the treetops. Their reactions carried no surprise. Several told her that fog in the surrounding valleys often held shapes that watched from within the white cover. Others explained that travelers who drifted too low sometimes sensed movement following them without sound. They described the fog as a place where visibility changed without warning, hiding things that shifted between the trees. Elena filed her flight report as required, noting the unusual ground formations and thick mist patterns. Authorities marked it as environmental distortion from heavy fog and soil saturation. No further action was taken, yet the memory of the silent figure, the deep impressions, and the slow wave through the trees stayed with her. The valley remained a place she avoided thereafter, leaving the fog-lined basin untouched by her flights. On March 2, 2024, 3 men named Sindre, Olav, and Marcus entered a remote glacial gorge in northern Norway, where sharp ice walls rose on both sides and deep cold settled early each day. The place was known for sudden acoustic booms that echoed through the frozen ground whenever shifting layers cracked beneath the surface. All 3 men were experienced winter travelers. Sindre worked as a mountain guide and often reported weather conditions for local groups. Olav handled navigation on long routes, and Marcus carried equipment for recording ice movement. Their goal was to cross the narrow gorge before dusk and document the strange sounds that had been reported there during rapid temperature drops. The approach into the gorge showed several fresh ice fractures along the upper rim. Wind moved only lightly through the passage, leaving most of the snow in smooth layers across the valley floor. The men set a small camp on a raised patch where the ice formed a flat surface. They placed their packs near a snow wall and kept their tools close for the evening survey. According to the final recorded transmission from Sindra, the group observed unusual marks near the rim of the gorge. Large, barefoot impressions pressed deeply into the ice, spaced far apart and showing clear edges despite recent powder. Near these impressions, the men noted a clean line of snow blocks arranged in a semicircle, each one cut smoothly from hardened layers and placed with careful spacing. As light faded, temperatures fell quickly, and the gorge grew darker than the surrounding valleys due to the high walls blocking the sky. The last communication received from Sindra mentioned the prints again and the precise curve of the snow blocks. After that, the signal dropped into a low, vibrating hum that continued for several seconds before falling silent. No further contact was reached by the monitoring station. When the rescue team entered the gorge the next morning, they found the campsite still intact. The tents remained upright, the equipment lay in its original positions, and no signs of a struggle appeared in the snow around the camp. However, the ground showed broad, pressed arcs surrounding the site, as though something large had moved around the perimeter multiple times. The arcs were smooth, wide, and even, with no clear beginning or end. The search widened through the gorge walls and surrounding ridges. Several hours later, Olaf was found barefoot on a high ridge above the valley. His body temperature was low, and early signs of hypothermia were visible. A faint layer of fine ice crystals covered the front of his jacket, as though he had been lying still on cold ground for an extended period. He remained conscious but disoriented, unable to explain how he had reached the ridge. Medical responders noted that he carried no gear, and there were no marks on his clothing except the thin frost. Sindri and Marcus did not appear anywhere near the ridge or the lower gorge. Their tracks did not lead away from the campsite. Rescue teams could not locate any sign of movement beyond the wide arcs pressed in the snow. Search efforts continued through the evening as temperatures dropped again, and the gorge returned to deep silence. Rescue teams expanded their search the following morning, moving deeper along the gorge where snowbanks rose in uneven layers against the ice walls. The pressed arcs around the campsite remained the clearest physical marks at the scene. Each arc showed wide compression with smooth edges, as if shaped by repeated passes of heavy weight. No human tracks crossed these patterns, and no equipment from the missing men appeared anywhere inside the looped impressions. The semicircle of snow blocks noted in Sindra's final report was also found unchanged at the upper rim. The blocks formed a precise half ring, each cut with clean edges that did not match natural cracking from the freeze-thaw cycle. The ground around them held no signs of tools. Teams followed the direction of the arcs, hoping to identify a trail that might lead towards Sindre and Marcus. However, the arcs did not create a clear path. Instead, they overlapped in broad sweeps, stopping abruptly before reaching the base of the cliffs. No drag marks, footprints, or dropped items traced a route away from the area. Snow conditions remained firm, and the absence of disturbed layers suggested that the missing men did not walk out of the gorge on their own power. Medical staff evaluated Olav as he regained stability. The fine layer of ice crystals across his jacket indicated that he had likely remained motionless for several hours before being found. His bare feet showed early frost damage, but no cuts or injuries suggested a fall. Rescue notes recorded that he could not recall the time between observing the semicircle of snow blocks and being discovered on the ridge. His account contained no details that explained the separation of the group or the loss of the other two men. As hours passed, weather conditions shifted. Thin clouds gathered above the gorge, dimming the landscape and creating long shadows along the valley floor. Searchers documented several ice booms echoing through the walls during the afternoon. These acoustic bursts were common in the region, caused by shifting glacial layers, but some carried a deeper tone that stood out from the normal sharp cracks. The sounds rolled through the gorge with slow, steady pulses, that made it difficult to judge their distance. Search grids were extended beyond the ridge where Olaf was found. Crews moved through steep terrain, checking crevices, snow pockets, and narrow bends in the ice. No footprints appeared in these upper areas, and no signs of recent human passage were discovered. Helicopter support scanned the surrounding valleys, but thermal imaging produced no results. The wide arcs near the camp remained the only lasting physical patterns connected to the incident. By late evening, the search was suspended due to light loss and growing cold. Equipment at the camp was collected and documented. Sindra's transmitter, left in a pocket near the tents, showed no damage. It held the final clear report he had sent before the signal faded into a low, vibrating hum. Technicians could not determine the source of the interference. In the weeks that followed, the disappearance of Sindri and Marcus was listed as unresolved. Investigators recorded no evidence of a fall, no signs of a known animal, and no clear environmental cause. Official statements noted only undetermined factors within the gorge. Local residents later reported slow, deliberate thuds echoing across the ice at dusk, spaced in long intervals and carrying through the narrow valley as if something moved beneath the surface or tested the ground for weakness. The two missing men were never found. Only the arranged snowblocks, the wide arcs, the frozen campsite, and the faint reports of heavy sounds remain as the final traces of what occurred in the glacial gorge that day. On February 11, 2023, winter weather closed tightly around the high ridges of the Swiss Alps as hunter Martin Keller moved along a narrow mountain line while tracking chamois. At 52 years old, he was known among alpine communities for long-distance climbs, steady judgment during storms, and years of experience traveling through steep snowfields. Records from a lodge in the lower valley confirmed he had checked out early that morning, carrying a small bivouac kit, food for one night, and the rifle he maintained carefully for protection and sport. The ridge he chose was remote, bordered by sharp drops and jagged rocks shaped by wind and ice. Through the early hours, conditions remained stable. Light snow drifted across the slope, and visibility allowed clear movement along the path. Satellite weather data later showed that a sudden system developed shortly after midday, sending heavy clouds over the region. By mid-afternoon, the ridge was covered in driving snow and wind strong enough to erase tracks within minutes. According to search reports, Martin likely moved toward a cluster of large boulders positioned near the ridge's edge, where climbers often paused during storms. When he did not return after 2 days, residents in the lower valley alerted mountain authorities. Weather delays slowed the response until conditions stabilized. A search team reached the ridge after the storm cleared, following faint signs of earlier movement along the upper trail. The ridge showed deep drifts shaped by strong wind, and the slope bore sections of flattened snow, indicating repeated weight in broad patterns, though the source was not yet identified. Near a broken outcrop of rock, investigators located Martin Keller's bivouac site. A small shelter space had been formed between two large boulders, providing limited protection from the wind. Snow around the site displayed wide, pressed arcs, as though something heavy had moved in slow, repeated paths before the surface hardened overnight. Photographs later confirmed that these arcs extended several meters beyond the shelter area. Martin was found seated upright against one of the large stones. His posture remained fixed, with the rifle resting across his knees. His boots had been removed and placed neatly to one side of the boulder. His gloves were folded with precise alignment beside them. There were no signs of injury, no displaced snow indicating a fall, and no marks on his clothing suggesting a struggle. Temperature readings confirmed that the site had remained cold enough to preserve surface details. Searchers documented several unusual features surrounding the location. Large, bare impressions in the snow formed a line from the ridge edge toward the boulder where Martin sat. Each print was spaced widely apart and pressed deeply into packed snow far beyond what a human step would create. The tracks continued past the bivouac site toward a dense spruce grove below the ridge, but ended abruptly where the tree cover thickened. A cluster of loose stones nearby had been arranged into spirals, placed carefully on a small flat patch just above the shelter. Snow-laden branches along the slope had been bent downward in smooth arcs, forming crude markers leading from the ridge toward the grove. None of these features matched natural storm damage or animal behavior. The search team prepared for a full site analysis, unaware that the final details would raise even more questions. The investigation of the bivouac site began once the initial documentation was completed. Snow conditions around the ridge allowed clear visibility of surface markings, and casts were taken of each large impression leading toward the spruce grove. Measurements showed that the prints exceeded normal human proportions by a wide margin. Depth readings indicated a weight far greater than any single person carrying gear. The spacing between impressions suggested a stride length that did not match alpine wildlife. No drag marks connected them, and no secondary tracks appeared around the spirals or bent branches. Medical personnel examined Martin Keller's body at the scene before removal. His clothing was intact and free of tearing. No trauma appeared on his hands, arms, or torso. The rifle resting across his knees held no spent shells, and the safety remained engaged. The boots set beside the boulder showed no sign of force. His folded gloves displayed no damage or frost penetration. The absence of defensive marks or ground disturbance indicated that no struggle had occurred. Exposure was considered, but the stable posture and organized placement of his equipment did not align with typical hypothermia patterns. The formal report later recorded the cause of death as undetermined. Attention shifted to the stone spirals located near the shelter. The rocks had been positioned in clean curves, each piece balanced on compacted snow. Teams noted that the arrangement showed deliberate placement rather than collapse or sliding during the storm. Wind direction data for the period did not support natural movement. Branches bent along the slope were also examined. Breaks were smooth and uniform, lacking splinter patterns common in storm damage. The markers formed a loose line guiding from the ridge toward the grove, maintaining consistent spacing. A wider search across the valley floor yielded no additional clues. The large prints vanished completely once the trail reached the heavier trees. Snow under the canopy remained untouched. No clothing, tools, or personal items belonging to Martin were discovered beyond the immediate area. Weather conditions remained calm during the search period, ensuring the tracks observed were preserved from the previous storm cycle. Authorities reviewed environmental hazards, wildlife patterns, and altitude-related complications, but found no explanation aligning with the scene. Official statements noted the absence of evidence pointing to an animal attack or human involvement. In the weeks following the recovery, hunters and residents reported deep, rhythmic sounds carrying across the valley during clear nights. Some spoke of low exhalations moving between rock faces, spaced evenly as if from something large crossing distant slopes. Though none of these accounts were confirmed, they led many locals to avoid the ridge after dark. Martin Keller's death remains unresolved, marked only by the prints, the pressed snow, and the silent slope where he was found. On September 22, 2021, in the dense pine regions of the Pacific Northwest, veteran ranger Daniel Mercer began an evening sweep along a remote forest corridor known for sudden pockets of ground fog. Daniel was 51 and had worked in rugged terrain for decades. Records from the ranger station describe him as steady in the field, familiar with long patrol routes and trained to navigate low-visibility zones. His assigned sweep covered a narrow stretch of woodland where fallen branches often blocked small access paths and where cold air collected quickly after sunset. He signed out his radio, logged his starting point, and drove toward the trailhead as daylight faded across the ridgelines. The road leading into the corridor was quiet, bordered by tall pines standing close together along shallow slopes. Early autumn had dropped a thin layer of needles on the ground, forming a soft carpet that muffled footsteps and vehicle noise. Weather reports from that day noted stable conditions with no major wind patterns, though temperatures dropped quickly once the sun lowered. The area was known for stillness, broken only by faint forest sounds during normal patrols. Daniel followed the assigned route as usual, moving deeper into the corridor where fog tended to settle without warning. His last recorded transmission reached the station shortly before dusk. The log described strong vibrations moving through the soil and a strange pattern of broken saplings leading away from the main path. The report ended without further detail. When he did not check in at the scheduled time, the station marked him overdue. Search procedures were activated and a team was prepared to follow his route at first light. At sunrise the next morning, the team reached the corridor entrance and found his truck parked neatly at the trailhead. The engine retained a trace of warmth, and the doors remained shut. Inside the cab, his jacket hung across the driver's seat in a careful drape that did not match hurried movement. His field notes and route map lay on the passenger side in ordered stacks, and no equipment appeared scattered or disturbed. From the vehicle, a single set of boot impressions moved into the forest. The first marks appeared clear and evenly spaced in the soft layer of needles. Teams followed the track line, which continued for roughly 200 yards into the deeper trees. The corridor grew narrower in this section, with dense clusters of pine lowering visibility even in morning light. Small amounts of fog drifted between trunks, collecting near the ground in thin sheets. The route ended beside a group of stones arranged in a tight circular formation. Daniel's boot prints stopped at the outer edge of the ring without continuing beyond it. Around the stones, the forest floor was pressed down in wide arcs, as though a heavy presence had circled the area multiple times. Soil flattening revealed deep, smooth curves rather than marks made by machinery or known animals. Low branches bowed downward in unusual angles, showing fresh stress along their fibers. The search team marked the site for a full forensic sweep, unaware that more unusual evidence remained hidden nearby. The deeper forest surrounding the stone ring showed more signs that something unusual had moved through the area. Soil near several cedar trunks was overturned in smooth lines, pressed down as if from broad weight shifting across the ground. A gouge marked one of the larger trunks nearly 12 feet above the base, cutting through bark in a long vertical scar. The break pattern did not match the climbing equipment or falling branches. Photographs taken at the site showed splintered fibers pointing outward, as though great force had been applied in a single upward motion. No ladder marks, tool prints, or loose debris appeared nearby. A short distance from the gouged trunk, searchers located Daniel Mercer's radio half buried in moss. The casing was intact except for a thin scratch along one side. When lifted, the device emitted a faint static pattern in steady beats, not matching normal interference from weather or damaged wiring. Technicians later tested the radio under controlled conditions, but were unable to reproduce the same rhythm. The surrounding ground displayed no tracks that could explain how the device reached that position. It sat as though placed there deliberately. Despite expanding the search grid across ridges, gullies, and side paths, teams found no further trace of Daniel. No clothing fibers, equipment pieces, or direction indicators appeared in any of the marked zones. The weather remained calm, preserving ground features and preventing fresh debris from covering prints. The absence of continued boot marks remained the most puzzling element. The last clear impression ended at the stone circle without deviation. Authorities documented all findings and listed the case as unresolved. Official statements noted that no signs of foul play or attack by known wildlife had been identified. The deep soil arcs, bent branches, and elevated gouge were recorded as environmental anomalies pending further study. Reports emphasized that the disappearance showed no evidence linking it to criminal activity or natural hazards commonly found in the region. The final notation stated that the investigation would remain open for future review. Weeks after the search ended, rangers began refusing to patrol the corridor alone. Several reported hearing slow, heavy steps echoing across the lower slopes during quiet hours, spaced far apart and moving in steady intervals through the trees. Others mentioned brief pulses in the soil, similar to distant weight shifting just beneath the surface. No visual sightings were confirmed, but the atmosphere of the corridor changed. Workers avoided the deeper stretch where the stone ring had been found, leaving the site undisturbed. Daniel Mercer has never been located. The arranged jacket, the halted prints, the pressed arcs in the soil, and the silent corridor remain the only evidence of what occurred that evening. On July 19, 2020, in rural Texas, a quiet patch of desert land held a small site known as Red Hollow RV Park, a simple place used by travelers who wanted to rest between long drives. The area sat far from towns, surrounded by low mesquite trees, dry soil, and open stretches of dusty road. Only a handful of trailers stayed there at any given time. Among the visitors that week were Frank Holden, his wife Marissa Holden, and a neighbor named Alex Romero, who had parked his small trailer 2 spaces away from them. The nights were usually calm, marked only by the chirp of insects and the soft hum of distant power lines. Frank and Marissa used the park as a temporary stop during a long trip across the state. They kept their small RV tidy, with tools stacked under the awning, a clean picnic table beside the door, and lightweight chairs arranged neatly on the gravel. Alex had arrived alone after finishing a long delivery route. He planned to rest for a single night before heading west. The environment offered little noise, and the open desert often cooled sharply after sunset, leaving the land still and dry. That night, the temperature dropped faster than expected. A thin layer of haze moved across the low ground, and the trees around the park stood unusually still. Most visitors had gone to sleep early, leaving the site nearly silent except for the faint buzz of the main electrical box near the entrance. The moonlight cast pale shadows across the gravel, stretching between the small trailers and the surrounding brush. Nothing seemed out of place at first. The appliances inside the trailers settled into their usual nighttime creaks, and the air around the park carried no wind. Around 3 a.m., the quiet shifted. The ground trembled in slow, steady pulses, spaced evenly, as though a heavy weight pressed into the earth beyond the trailers. Pots and pans inside the rigs vibrated softly against each other. Lightweight items on counters rattled in short tap. The disturbance did not match passing trucks or distant machinery. It felt deeper, more controlled, moving through the soil rather than above it. Frank and Marissa's RV shook once with a sharp jolt, enough to shift the balance of the frame. Chairs outside bumped together, and the picnic table near their steps creaked lightly against the gravel. Several trailers across the small property experienced the same rhythmic shaking. The impacts continued with slow precision, circling parts of the park in a wide pattern. The still desert air carried each thud with an unnatural clarity, as if the vibrations traveled through the ground instead of the open space. The mesquite branches did not move. The gravel remained undisturbed. Only the force beneath the trailers gave any sign that something large moved in the darkness. As the slow impacts passed near Alex's spot, his trailer shifted slightly, as though weight approached from one side and retreated again with measured step. The quiet tension thickened across the site. No animals called. No wind rose. The entire park seemed to pause while the steady rhythm continued around the sleeping visitors. By the time the vibrations reached their slowest point, the dark space between the trees near the center of the park grew heavier, as if something stood just out of view, waiting in the still desert night. As the dim light before sunrise began spreading across the desert, the silence around Red Hollow RV Park remained unnaturally heavy. The slow ground impacts faded one by one until they disappeared entirely. No trailer doors opened during those final moments. The air stayed still, and the brush along the edges of the property held its rigid shape as though nothing had passed between the trees. When the sky shifted from gray to pale blue, movement finally returned to the area. Alex Romero stepped outside first. Cold air clung to the ground, and a thin layer of dust drifted in soft streaks across the open spaces. He walked toward the mesquite grove near the center of the park and stopped suddenly when he noticed a tall outline standing between 2 trees. The shape did not sway or shift. It rose straight, broad through the upper body with a stillness that matched the silent ground beneath it. For several seconds, the figure remained fixed in place, its height far above the branches that usually brushed the heads of passing visitors. Then, without sound, it moved back into the brush and vanished between the twisted limbs of the desert plants. He retreated toward his trailer as the first sunlight touched the gravel. Other campers emerged shortly after, examining the property in the cold morning air. The damage around the site became clear quickly. The The siding on Frank and Marissa Holden's RV carried long scratches that cut across the metal surface in wide intervals. The marks reached far beyond normal human reach, spaced in a pattern that suggested immense strength rather than accidental contact. No sharp tool could have created such broad impressions without leaving clear fragments behind. The picnic table beside their RV had shifted several feet and now faced the open scrubland rather than the gravel pad where it had been placed. The dirt beneath the legs showed smooth lines, as though it had been rotated carefully rather than knocked over. A faint track of disturbed soil circled part of the park, but the impressions themselves remained vague, as if whatever moved through the area avoided stepping onto exposed gravel. Only subtle dips in the dust hinted at the path it followed as it moved between the trailers. Campers left the area quickly after noting the heavy silence still hanging over the park. No one stayed long enough to search the nearby brush. Residents later spoke of the unease that settled across the site, insisting that something large had watched the small group for hours without revealing its full shape. Official statements listed the disturbance as unexplained, and no further activity was recorded in the weeks that followed.